Have you ever had that feeling that you are clueless at what you're doing, that you are so unsure of yourself and your skills and abilities, and you're so sure that someone is going to find out that you do not know what you're doing and that you're an absolute fraud and imposter in the role you are pretending to be doing to the best of your abilities? But that feeling that you can be exposed to be an imposter or a fraud, that you don't actually know what you're doing, that level of self-doubt is what's known in psychology as the imposter syndrome. And that's what we're exploring today on Risk and Rise.
Welcome to Risk and Rise, the podcast where we explore the journey of overcoming the fear of failure, embracing risk, and achieving success in entrepreneurship, creativity, and personal growth. I'm your host, Telana Simpson, and I'm thrilled to embark on this journey with you. Together, we'll discover the strategies, insights, and shifts in our thinking and attitudes that are needed to turn setbacks into stepping stones and transform fear into fuel for success. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's episode of Risk and Rise.
Welcome to Risk and Rise with me, Telana Simpson, as your host. Today I want to share with you what I've learned about the imposter syndrome. And the first thing we're going to do is just throw out that word syndrome, because syndrome just makes it feel stuck, like it's something you've caught and got and you're never going to be able to change it. It actually is better described as a phenomenon. It's a collection of thinking styles that leads us to feel like an imposter in our own lives and in our own jobs and our own businesses. And it is something that can be changed. And I know this from all the research I've done, the work I do with people, and really want to share with you just more about it so you can understand if it is something that happens for you. And also sometimes just knowing this thing has a name is already the biggest shift that can happen for us. So the best way to try and explain what the imposter syndrome is I want to read you a quote from Amanda Palmer from her book called The Art of Asking. She says, "I've had a problem feeling real all my life. I didn't know until recently how absolutely universal that feeling is. For a long time, I thought I was alone. Psychologists have a term for it, imposter syndrome. But before I knew that phrase existed, I coined my own, the fraud police. The fraud police are the imaginary, terrifying force of real grown-ups who you believe at some subconscious level are going to come knocking on your door in the middle of the night saying, 'We've been watching you. We have evidence that you have no idea what you're doing. You stand accused of the crime of completely winging it. You are guilty of making shit up as you go along, and you do not actually deserve your job. We are taking everything away, and we are telling everybody.'" I love the way Amanda Palmer describes it as the fraud police, because it does feel like when we are suffering from this phenomenon that there is some kind of police out there, some authority that is going to come and expose us. And that fear of being exposed as a fraud, as an imposter, can have some dire consequences, especially if we're thinking of starting something. This phenomenon was first identified in 1978 by psychologists Pauline Rose Glantz and Suzanne Imes. They have come up with a definition that I think is one of the most useful ones for us to use if we are looking at this imposter phenomenon. And they define it as this: a collection of thought patterns and reactions to particular events where we doubt our abilities, discount our achievements, we say they're due to luck and not skill. Fear being exposed as a fraud or phony, and feel not good enough in some way. Not good enough, not clever enough, not smart enough, not thin enough, not whatever. We feel not enough in some way. So when you look at that definition, it gives us a framework with which we can actually shift out of the imposter phenomenon and change our collection of thought patterns. We can start to develop flexibility in our thinking that will lead us to experience less and less of this imposter phenomenon and more of what I call courageous living. That is what we want, is to be more courageous in our lives instead of suffering from the effects of this phenomenon. And what's interesting is the imposter phenomenon, there's actually like a cycle to it. So you may not experience this all the time in everything you do. It usually like flares up. It gets triggered in certain moments. And that's usually when you get a new task or a new project in front of you. You've been asked to do a presentation within your work, or you're thinking of starting a new business, or you want to write that book. Some kind of new expression of you is being requested or asked of within the context within you, which you are living and working. And that immediately brings up a whole level of anxiety, procrastination, and even over preparation. So our response often to a new task is we feel highly anxious, which is a type of fear. There's a fear there of whatever risk we perceive is involved in this new task. We procrastinate, we put it off, we avoid it because we're scared that it will expose us as the fraud we believe we are. We are concerned that we're not going to be able to do it perfectly. We're not going to be able to achieve this new task, and therefore that will let the world know that we are this imposter. Or we tend to swing the other way. So if we don't avoid the task, we tend to over prepare. And again, that's a sign of perfectionism. We are aiming to do this so perfectly and so to such a high standard. And it's a way of us trying to manage the anxiety that this new task has brought about. So from there, somehow we manage to complete the project. We actually finish it. It's usually because there's a huge deadline, or we finally launch the business and it's alive, it's out there. So the project is completed in some way. That phase, we get a brief sense of relief, like, sure, it's over, and a sense of accomplishment because, yep, we can tick that off our list. We did it. But then, especially if it was a successful task, completion of the project, it went well. The problem with the imposter cycle is we start to then doubt ourselves and rationalize away the effort we put in, and we say, I was just lucky. I just, someone else would have done it better than me. This kind of thinking that exposes that underneath it, that you don't believe in your own abilities. We start to attribute any of the completion to it to being outside of us. I was just lucky at the time, or because of the deadline, I just had to release whatever I'd got to at that point. The comparing to other people, someone else would have done it better. And after that rationalization, we just doubt ourselves even more. We've come up with all the reasons why it wasn't our ability, and that just feeds that anxiety. That feeds the feeling like a fraud. That feeds that feeling that I'm just not good enough at this. And then guess what? Life brings us a new task, a new project. And we start all over again by having that anxiety triggered again. We procrastinate, we over prepare. We then somehow manage to get the project completed, and we get that moment of relief, like, sure, we did it. But then we rationalize it away. I was just lucky again. Could have done it better. feeds our self-doubt and anxiety, and so the cycle, the imposter cycle, continues. No way. So really, this imposter phenomenon can be a significant barrier to us starting anything. Whether it's just starting a new relationship, it's been known to flare up there, or to starting a business, or to growing the business to the next level, starting a new phase, or starting some kind of creative endeavor. So to me, it's not so much the different contexts may bring something to light in terms of this phenomenon for yourself, but it comes up many times, but often it's the start of something that triggers it. And it really manifests as intense self-doubt, really, that the key symptoms to it, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship, is we doubt ourselves so much, and anything we have succeeded in the past, we literally attribute it to luck. We are not able in some way to make the connection that it could actually be that we're good at something, that we have some skills and abilities and knowledge in some area. So this self-doubt just feeds our perfectionism, where we really feel like we have to achieve flawless results. The results themselves are what defines our sense of self-worth. Now, I have in a previous episode spoken about what I have found as being the underpinning, the deeply seated issue behind our fear of failure is how we have defined our sense of self-worth, and I called it true self-esteem. But if we, or not having true self-esteem, I should say, if we don't have true self-esteem, if we have made our sense of worth conditional on results, we put ourselves under such huge pressure to perform, and that performance has to be perfect, because if it's not perfect, it just proves to the world that we are a fraud and that we don't have any worth or value. So one of the ways to shift it is to change the way we have constructed our sense of self-worth. But this fear that we experience in starting something is that if we start this, if we actually do it and put it out there in the world, we will be exposed as the fraud that we believe we are, because if it's not perfect, and deep down we know perfection is unattainable, it's a most useless standard to go for. So we either put things off, or we overwork to try and make it perfect, because that's the way we've defined ourselves or linked our identity. And we have to then make it perfect in order to show the world that we are not this fraud. So that fear of being exposed is a huge part of the fear of failure, because if there's any chance we could fail, and if you've been listening to any of the interviews with the wonderful guests I've had, every single one of them has failed at some point in the entrepreneurial journey. So it's a given that you will make mistakes, but if we've linked our identity to whether we make mistakes or not, the fear of that will stop us and hold us back, and also trigger this imposter phenomenon. And really, it just does nothing for our risk fitness. If we are under the spell of the imposter phenomenon, we will be risk averse. We will fear taking any kind of risk, because a risk there has the danger of exposing us as this fraud that we subconsciously believe ourselves to be. And if we avoid risks, we avoid stepping out of our comfort zones, we are less likely to ever achieve anything new, we're less likely to grow. So it actually feeds into the fixed mindset, which is the opposite of the growth mindset that we would want if we want to enjoy our entrepreneurial journeys. So we are less likely to be able to express ourselves entrepreneurially or creatively if we fear risk, for fear that it will expose us. And that if we make mistakes, especially if the mistake would be visible publicly, that is just something that will ignite this phenomenon. And this phenomenon is not a comfortable experience. It's really like an undercurrent. I know a lot of people push through it somehow, which is just amazing of them. But the experience by which they try to do things or are forced to do things, if it's like in a job or there's a huge deadline, is such an uncomfortable experience. And it does not have to have that. It can still be a challenging experience when we're trying to move our boundaries and try something new, but it does not need to have this imposter phenomenon linked to it, and all this fear. In the Journal of Behavioral Sciences, there's an article that says that 70% of people will experience the imposter phenomenon at some point in their lives. That's 70% of us at some point are going to feel this intense fear that the fraud police are going to find us. So why I'm sharing this with you is the first step in order to counteract this thinking style that leads to the imposter phenomenon is to what they call normalize it, is to understand just how normal and common it is right now as a human experience in the ways our society and our culture is created. So in today's day and age, it's a very common experience to have. The thing with it, though, is you do not have to identify it and hold on to it so much that you live an imposter life, as is called. We want to rather just have imposter moments. So the first tip I can share with you around overcoming this imposter phenomenon is just to, when it happens, it's like, oh, there is that imposter thinking again. Is just to normalize it, just to make it as something that most people experience at some point, and knowing that it's just a moment in time where a certain collection of thinking styles have been activated that are leading you to experience that imposter phenomenon in that moment, helps you to release it as just a moment. Moments move. One moment you're experiencing something, the next moment you can experience something totally different. So instead of having an imposter life where you feel like you are suffering from and you've taken on the imposter syndrome, that's why I don't like the word syndrome with it. It's if you take that on board, you will live an imposter life. You will in your whole life suffer from this experience. But if you can rather just normalize it and just acknowledge, oh, I'm having an imposter moment. I promise you, with a few other things that we'll explore as we go along in this podcast, the imposter moment will move. It will shift. And sometimes just that act of naming it and just saying it's a moment is already a way to shift out of it. So just so you know how prevalent this is, Maya Angelou, one of the most amazing authors and writers, she is known to have also experienced this phenomenon. And she says, this is a quote from her, each time I write a book, every time I face that yellow pad, the challenge is so great. I've written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out. So that's someone who she had such success with her books during her lifetime. And yet every time she put pen to paper, she had an imposter moment. Another example of a very creative person, Jennifer Lopez, she has been known to say, even though I had sold 70 million albums, there I was feeling like I'm no good at this. So the thing with the imposter phenomenon is to realize that some of the people in our world who have experienced the most extreme levels of success, 70 million albums sold, can still experience an imposter moment. So in my framework of helping people overcome the imposter phenomenon, there are what I believe are 7 parts to it, right? The first is we have to normalize it. We have to acknowledge that everyone experiences it and we're just having an imposter moment. We have to shift our sense of self-worth to what I call true self-esteem. We have to learn to manage that beast of imposter. We have to learn how to manage perfectionism and actually not engage with perfectionistic thinking or tendencies, and rather shift it to what's called optimizing. We have to develop our growth mindset. We have to turn the spotlight effect off. We have to engage with our authenticity. We have to show up and just be ourselves. And we have to learn about confidence and how taking confident action is one of the key steps in shifting this imposter phenomenon. And all that together I'd call authentic living. And it's all part of what, to me, authentic living is part of courageous living. It's how we, big part of being more courageous in our lives, because the world needs us to show up authentically as ourselves and bring our skills and abilities and our willingness to learn and grow and develop and help each other to overcome mistakes and pick up where we left off and bounce back with resilience, so that we can do what we need to do in this world to make it a better place and to experience all what it means to really to be human. So today in Risk and Rise, I just wanted to share the beginnings of the imposter phenomenon and how it is linked to us starting anything in our lives, and wanted to give you some sense of hope that it is it's not something you have to live with and engage with forever. There are a collection of thinking styles that if we shift our flexibility with it, if we can maybe just gain more flexibility is a better way of explaining it. If we can access different thinking styles, we will have less imposter moments and live more authentically in the moment, being able to show up and bring our value that we have to that moment, so that we can make a difference in this world in the way that we are called to and want to. If you would like to get a sense of how much this imposter phenomenon is showing up in your life right now, and if it is something that you experience, and therefore also to what degree, Pauline Clance, who is one of the developers or came up with the identifying this concept, has a really wonderful scale. It's a little questionnaire, 20 questions that you can answer, and it will give you some sense of where you are on this imposter phenomenon continuum. It will give you a sense of how prevalent it is and perhaps even some of the next steps you can take. You're welcome to email me and I will send you the link or to the PDF of the scale so that you can work out how much this imposter phenomenon is active in your life. Just pop me an email at hello@riskandrise.co.za and just let me know you want the imposter phenomenon questionnaire. I will pass that through to you, and I give all credit to Pauline Clance. It is available on the internet. You're welcome to Google it to find it. But if you want a quick way, pop me an email. I will share it with you. And really, it's just as a resource so that you understand if this is something you should maybe just develop more flexibility around. And just know the first and most useful way to shift this is just to say, I'm having an imposter moment. And then that moment will shift, especially if you start to acknowledge and own your capabilities, your skills, and know that confidence comes from practice and that you activate your growth mindset. If this was useful to you, please do let me know, and also follow us. Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, your favorite podcast app. It really does help if you actually subscribe and give us a rating for others to find us. And that way we can all overcome this thing called the imposter phenomenon and start to risk and rise together.
Thank you for joining me on Risk and Rise, where we face fears, conquer challenges, and rise above adversity to achieve our dreams. Find out more at riskandrise.co.za.